Good evening and welcome to World Talks with me, Tallis. We're going to discuss the latest on Germany-Ukraine front. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy on Friday. Zelenskyy was in the country to attend the Ukraine Defense Contact Group meeting at the Rammstein base. Following the meeting, Schultz said that he and Ukrainian President agreed that Russia should be included in a future peace conference aimed at ending the war in Ukraine. Does this signal a pivotal moment in the war? When could we expect such a conference to take place, and what conditions would need to be met for a lasting peace? To discuss, I am joined here this evening by Benjamin Tallis, Director, Democratic Strategy Initiative Center. Good evening, sir. Delighted to have you with us.
Good evening. A pleasure to be back with you.
So let me start by asking you, how shall we sort of assess what Scholz said against the backdrop of the sort of domestic situation in Germany?
Well, I think we have to take it with a pinch of salt, first of all, because what Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Olaf Scholz respectively mean by this conference, when they would consider it suitable to happen and under what conditions in terms of negotiation, may be very different. And nonetheless, they managed to find a wording they could agree on. But behind that wording, I think there's still probably a lot of blue water between the two positions. The big danger here is that Olaf Scholz is actually signaling a watering down of Germany's aid to Ukraine, something he's been criticized by Foreign Minister Baerbock for, and also for continuing to be soft on the need for Ukraine's victory. And this does come in the context of those recent state elections. But it's quite clear to me and to many other analysts here that it's a cynical and willful misreading of those election results that is driving this.
Right. So you're saying that what can we sort of expect moving forward? What will be Scholz's stance on aid for Ukraine moving forward?
Well, we've already seen that Germany's cut its aid to Ukraine in half for next year and cut further future aid to Ukraine after that. And I think the key issue to understand here is that it's been claimed that the election results in the states of Thuringia and Saxony show that Germans don't support supplying Ukraine with what it needs to win, don't support continued action to ensure that Russia is defeated. That actually really misreads the election results. There was an interesting poll done for the main German news channel in Thuringia, showing that of people who chose to vote for the AfD, Ukraine was a decisive factor for only 3% of those voters, compared to 50% who saw migration as a decisive factor, and about 35% who saw inflation and cost of living as a key factor, and 35% who also saw the inner security and crime as a key issue. Ukraine was far below all of these things in determining the switch to extreme right parties who hold pro-Kremlin views. So what we're seeing is the German government, particularly Olaf Scholz here, reacting to something that wasn't there. And that's a cynical move that actually backs up his long-held position, which has been not to support Ukraine to win. So I think this is something that both Germans, but also Ukrainians and Germany's allies need to keep a really close eye on.
Right, so, but let me ask you about the economic situation in the country. You've mentioned migration, but also, of course, economy is an important factor for the voters, issue for the voters. And so Germany used to have pretty strong ties with Russia prior to the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. And also it continues to import significant amounts of LNG, right, still. I mean, the whole of Europe, that's the whole of European Union, LNG that is not sanctioned as for instance, oil is, right? So do you see any changes here, perhaps a different package of sanctions, something changing on this front? And how is this an important factor in perhaps trying to put an end to the war in Ukraine?
Well, of course, sanctions packages would have to be agreed across all the EU states, and we'll see where the collective will for that lies. But to be clear, Germany's LNG terminals were created to provide alternative sources of energy, getting Germany off Russian gas. And so Germany is supplied by Qatar, by Azerbaijan, two autocracies, but also by Norway, as well as some other sources as well. So I don't think that's a key driver here. The main driver is that Olaf Scholz and his chancellery have set a strategy that aims to change Germany as little as possible from the world in 2022, so before Russia's full-scale invasion, because that would mean an upheaval for certain kinds of German business, the kind of German business that is very dependent on China. And a Ukrainian victory and a Russian defeat would really accelerate this process of competition between democracies and authoritarian states, including China, and make life very difficult for Germany. So Scholz and his chancellery are pursuing this continuity strategy, which has been criticized by other members of the government, but they haven't actually been able to actually mount an effective opposition to this, an effective counter strategy yet. But certainly economic considerations play a role. And let me say one more thing about that, which is that economic considerations are a big issue for voters in the states that are voting and for all Germans, because there's not really a credible source of future prosperity, given the economic and trade model that Germany has. People are worried about that dependency on China. They're worried that they no longer get the cheap energy from Russia, so there might be something to be considered in future there. But mainly it's about German growth and understanding that German productivity is low, investment in Germany is quite low, scaling up of innovative companies is low. These are hard issues to solve. And so to see Olaf Scholz taking the cynical move of trying to link this to ending the Ukraine war, rather than really addressing himself to the country's deep-seated problems, is not a pretty sight.
Right, so, and you've mentioned China. I sort of wanted to follow up on that because the previous conference, the one held in Switzerland, was not attended by China, obviously. So perhaps this next conference that we're discussing right now could be attended by China as well. And how is this whole situation affecting the Chinese/German trade relationship?
Well, Germany released a China strategy last year that was supposed to clarify the country's approach to dealing with one of its largest single trade partner, although bearing in mind that Germany does more trade overall with the Visegrad 4 countries than with China, it rather puts that in perspective. But this China strategy left so-called de-risking up to individual companies, which has subsequently led many of them, such as Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, companies that are really associated with the brand of Germany, to invest more in China rather than less, to actually expose themselves more to Chinese risk, which the head of Mercedes even said for him that was what de-risking meant. Now, that's not what de-risking means to any of the security experts that I talked to here in Berlin, nor to a lot of the political parties, in fact. So there's a real conflict of interest between what some of Germany's biggest companies are doing and what's good for the economy as a whole. Now, Germany's relationship with China has been characterized by accommodation, let's say, but this is becoming more difficult in the context of potential conflict in the Taiwan Strait. And we might see Germany take a relatively bold step of sending a warship through the Taiwan Strait on a freedom of navigation mission soon. And if they were to do that, it would raise questions in Beijing. And the reaction then from Berlin, would they soften their approach again, or would they continue to take a harder stance, will tell us a lot about where they're going. And overall, I think this will tell us more also about the likely participation of China that you asked about in any future peace conference. But remember that the terms of this peace conference, again, will be very different for the Ukrainians than they would be for Olaf Scholz, as far as I read the situation. And it's dangerous for Europe, dangerous for Ukraine, and indeed dangerous for Germany if their government starts pushing Ukraine to negotiate on terms that are unacceptable, that wouldn't bring an acceptable, secure peace that would lead to a stable security order in Europe.
So, and we've been discussing possible conditions for peace and so on, but what about what's going on the battlefield? And of course, Germany has been asked time and time again to provide Taurus missiles, and as far as, if I'm not mistaken, they still haven't done that, right? So my question is, do you think that Scholz perhaps will eventually be convinced to do so? Or not? Will he have a similar stance to what the US is presenting, and Lloyd Austin saying no, right?
I don't see at the moment any possibility of Olaf Scholz changing his stance on Taurus. This has become a hill he fully intends to die on, and it's very sad for Ukraine. It's sad for Germany's allies who can see the value of this, and we've seen now allies openly calling for Germany to send the Taurus missiles. The Lithuanian Foreign Minister, Gabrielius Landsbergis, is just the latest to call for this openly recently. And I think we're going to see more of that, this public pressure on Berlin to send Taurus, which would make a potential difference. But we also see the Ukrainian reaction to not sending Taurus, which is to start building their own strategic strike force of long-range precision strike weapons that can hit Russia's logistics, can hit bases in Russia, can hit their command and control. All the things that would disable Russia's combat power. And if they build the weapons themselves, of course, there are no restrictions on where they can be used, unlike the weapons provided by Western partners. So I don't don't see there likely to be a change in that situation. And I think the need, therefore, is very clear for Ukraine's Western partners to provide the money, the technical know-how, provide the industrial supply chains to help Ukraine build up its own strategic strike force.
Certainly, self-reliance would be a good strategy for Ukraine. Thank you, sir, so much for being with us this afternoon and for providing your insights. Much appreciated.
Pleasure to be with you.
And thank you for watching World Talks. Benjamin Tallis, Director, Democratic Strategy Initiative, was my guest this evening. Please stay tuned for more here on TVP World.